Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Peter Jennings, and I go by CSURAM88 across the daily fantasy industry. And I'm excited to be back at Fantasy Labs doing a model preview for the quarterback position on DraftKings. This will be a relatively short video, but wanted to talk through these quarterbacks. I think it's a really interesting week on the position, and hopefully can give you guys some insights. Recording this late here on Saturday and have some pretty good updated projections from Sean Corner. I like doing these previews once he's done all his final sweeps because a huge part of the process here is going to be based on his projections, which I think are the best in the industry. Looking at the model, you can see I baked that in. I have Vegas score at 5 points, opponent rating at 5, points per percentile at 50, and projected plus minus at 40 points. I think this is a really, really solid model that's going to really emphasize Sean's work. In addition, is factoring in a projected plus minus, which is a proprietary metric here at Fantasy Labs. So, taking a look at the list, the top quarterback is Kyler Murray, and I'm excited about Kyler Murray for a variety of reasons. Obviously, he has huge upside with his legs, but his price tag is only $5,600. This team has been playing a little slower. Arizona and Cleveland's not the best matchup, but I do think it's a strong play. And Ian Hartitz gave his first quarterback helicopter play all year, which was Kyler Murray. So happy to see Kyler at the top of the model. I actually don't think he's going to be very heavily owned. I think the guys a little bit lower on this list are going to be very, very popular. So excited about Kyler. Deshaun Watson is next on the list at 6,800. And I think you can make a really strong argument that he's the best quarterback on the slate. In terms of raw projection here, you can see that you can sort by that. That's who Sean has as the highest rated in our models, or highest projected, I should say. So I do think he's a really strong play and someone that I'm going to make sure I have a lot of exposure to. I think around the industry, he's probably the cash game quarterback on DraftKings. There's a compelling argument for a lot of these guys. So Deshaun Watson, 6,800, I think makes a lot of sense. I don't need to talk too much, but the addition of Will Fuller should be really, really helpful for him. Eli Manning's next on the list at 5,200, and I like him quite a bit going against this Dolphins team. Basically a perfect setup against one of the worst teams in the NFL. They've been extremely giving to fantasy quarterbacks as well as running backs. So I think Eli Manning, Saquon Barkley makes a lot of sense, as well as all the other options that Eli has. He has a full complement of receivers with Slayton, Shepard, and Tate. Wish he had Ingram, but I still think he's a really, really good play. Dak Prescott's next at 6,300. I think this game goes a little under-owned, so for tournaments, I love the idea of stacking up Dallas and the Rams. Dak, with Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper, Zeke Elliott, Jason Witten, he has a lot of weapons. Throwing Witten in there is a little liberal, but I do think Dak's in a really good spot at home. He has huge splits there. I particularly like stacking up with Gallup with the assumption that Ramsey's going to shadow Amari Cooper. Jimmy Garoppolo's the next guy on the list, and San Francisco has a huge implied team total here, and I think he's a really strong play. He's actually flashed a really big ceiling, as you've seen over the last couple of weeks, specifically last week, and then against the Cardinals as well. So I don't mind going to Garoppolo here against the Falcons. I think it's a really strong spot, and I'm going to prioritize getting some stacks in there with Garoppolo. Love George Kittle, Emmanuel Sanders, Deebo Samuel. Mo Stert has been really talented. So I think loading up on the 49ers makes sense this week. Ryan Tannehill is next on the list, and he's one of my top-rated quarterbacks overall, considering him in a lot of formats across the industry. Love what he's been doing, and this Houston defense has just been putrid since the loss of J.J. Watt. So Ryan Tannehill, people are knocking his pass attempts, but if he wasn't so ridiculously efficient, he would be throwing more. And he's just been hitting on huge plays. You have A.J. Brown, you have Corey Davis, you have the tight ends. Obviously, there's concern with Derrick Henry taking up a lot of the usage in the offense with just a ton of runs, but he was banged up with a hamstring, so I think Ryan Tannehill is a really sharp tournament play, although this game is the highest overall total, so there will be a concentrated ownership with Watson and Tannehill. Minshew's next on the list, and I think the most compelling reason to play Gardner Minshew on DraftKings is the wide receivers for the Jaguars are so cheap and such good value between Westbrook, Conley, and Keenan Cole. I'm going to have exposure, and it's a really good matchup against Oakland. I think Gardner makes a lot of sense. Also pretty high on Patrick Mahomes, who I think is Underrated play. I think a lot of people are going to play Deshaun Watson and Tannehill if they're spending up. And I think Patrick Mahomes at home versus Denver defense, which is in a big letdown spot, makes sense. I think Mahomes to Tyreek Hill in particular is a really strong stack. If you want to get, creative with tournaments, you can look at guys like Sammy Watkins. Love to see McCole Hardman getting more snaps. And obviously Travis Kelce's a good play every week, but Denver has done a good job of shutting him down. Kyle Allen next on the list. I'm not quite as high on Kyle Allen relatively. I love his pieces. I think McCaffrey, Moore, and Samuel make sense, as well as Ian Thomas. But Kyle Allen is one of those guys that's hard for me to pull the trigger. How we have not seen that just massive game. Has been consistent in the last 3 games, performing pretty well, but we haven't seen those huge ceiling games yet from Kyle Allen, so I think I'm going to pass. Derek Carr's a sneaky one with Waller and Tyrell Williams. Obviously, the Raiders have been up and down. Looks like Josh Jacobs is going to play. Again, Derek Carr has not had that really big ceiling game so far, so hard to pull the trigger. In terms of someone who has had a huge ceiling, I think Jameis Winston is one of the best tournament plays on the board. Went for 40 fantasy points last week. I don't think people are going to click him as much with the thumb concern and the questionable tag. In addition, Mike Evans is out, so people won't want to stack him up as much just because Mike Evans, Godwin were such enticing receivers to play. I love Jameis this week. Probably my favorite tournament play on the board. Love him with O.J. Howard. I think you can go to Perriman. I think you can play Watson. And, of course, Godwin is a really strong play as well. Phillip Rivers next on the list, and the same problem with Phillip Rivers, just never really has a huge ceiling game. I think he's just one of those guys who is solid, but is not going to put up that monster slate-breaking week. And against the Vikings, they do have a flammable secondary, but I'll be buying the pieces of the Chargers versus Phillip Rivers. You have Tom Brady next. Probably won't be going there. I think the running game is more interesting, and we just haven't seen huge games out of Brady either. Love Russell Wilson. Chris Carson's going to be the chalk, and I think a really great pivot in tournaments off Chris Carson is Russell Wilson in the passing game. Baker Mayfield against the Cardinals. With Jarvis Landry, I don't hate that. Same thing with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Devontae Parker and Albert Wilson are both going to play, so I think Fitzpatrick makes a lot of sense. And then Jared Goff, I like to play him at home, but don't hate the idea of going Jared Goff in this game. That's a pretty nice total, and you have a lot of optionality to swap with 5 late games. Also want to shout out Aaron Rodgers. I think the Bears play well here, but at home he always deserves consideration. And of course you have Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan down here as well, who I think are interesting plays too. As you can see, there's a lot of compelling options for quarterback. I think you want to stick with Kyler, Deshaun, probably Tannehill as your cash game guys. But in tournaments, there's just so many different ways you can go. And it should be an awesome tournament week. Obviously, it's the championship week on DraftKings and FanDuel. And, of course, the fantasy playoffs. So good luck to everyone. As always, looking to see Fantasy Lab subscribers at the top of the leaderboard.